That almost the language of the barrack room at one point on Prime Minister's Questions last week, but you certainly got your point across. Got to get you first on, though, Ukraine, the situation there. And I have to put to you, how helpful or otherwise was the US President Joe Biden seeming to call for regime change in Russia on Saturday, but then rowing back in Washington yesterday. Sir Keir, morning, by the way, thanks for coming in.
Not helpful. To say something, to row back, big thing to say for obvious reasons. But the Ukraine situation is thoroughly depressing. I mean, I remember how I felt when the Berlin Wall came down, and it felt like the whole of Europe, freedom, liberation, sovereignty meant something completely different. And I didn't think in my lifetime we'd see Russian tanks going into a European country, soldiers kissing their children goodbye as they stay to defend their cities and their country, or the terrible bombing of civilians, including hospitals. And so it's a devastating situation. Obviously, we all want it resolved just as quickly as possible. I hope that talks can make some progress, but at the moment it's quite difficult to see what the substance of the talks is. There's a willingness to talk, of course, that's a good thing, but the substance, I think, is going to be much, much more difficult.
Prime Minister Johnson and his stewardship of the United Kingdom response, Sir Keir?
Well, in some respects, on refugees, I think they've just got it completely wrong, and they've still got this, DIY package, really, which is all over the place, where we hear the refugees who are supposed to be on their way here still haven't got visas and clearance. On sanctions, I think they should have gone further and faster. On the other hand, I have, on a number of occasions in the House of Commons, made it clear that politically the United Kingdom stands united in the face of Russian aggression. I do think there are times in our history where it's the role of the leader of the opposition to show the unity of purpose when it comes to something as significant as this. And that's why on a number of occasions I've said, political parties will stand shoulder to shoulder in the face of this threat from Russia. And that's the right thing to do, notwithstanding the criticism. I think on refugees, they've just gone too slowly. They're too mean. I don't think this DIY package is working very well. On sanctions, I really think they should have gone further.
Where should they have gone? You mentioned they should have gone further, and indeed you did say faster. In what way? What should they have targeted that they didn't?
Well, two things I'd highlight, Nick. The first is they really should have put these sanctions in place years ago. We had something called the Russia Report, you'll know that well, which is worth dusting off. Almost word for word, it spells out what the problem is and what needed to be done, and it wasn't done for 2 years. And then, everyone will say, well, all right, Keir, but we are where we are. Now sanctions have gone in, and one of the most important things is where people hold property, and there's a lot of money and property in London. Quite often oligarchs register it in the name of companies that have no link or no obvious link to them, so you wouldn't know they owned the property. We've been pushing the government on this. The government knows that's a problem, so they've said, well, let's have a register. You've got to register your property. That will tell you who the real owner is.
That cannot be beyond the wit of man to resolve
this.
No,
that should have been done a long time ago, but the government's allowed a 6-month period to register. So if you are an oligarch who think you might be sanctioned, and you've got huge billions tied up in properties in London, and you've got 6 months to register it, do you A, register it and get it sanctioned, or B, sell it in that 6 months and therefore the sanction can never bite? So I'm frustrated. We said to the government, look, put in a 28-day rule and you'll actually get some of these sanctions. I think this 6-month rule means there's going to be a lot of sanctions that should be in place that probably now won't be.
Some politicians are saying they will offer homes to refugees. I've not seen anything from you on that, Sir Keir. Have you opined on that?
Well, we'd all like to play our part, and I have been incredibly struck by the generosity of the British public in terms of the thousands of people that are going to take or have offered to take in a refugee. Look, we'd like to play our part. There are practical issues in relation to being leader of the opposition, but I do salute that generosity. I am worried that this scheme hasn't been thought through by the government because when the Afghan refugees came, you may remember in tail end of August and September, a lot of refugees arrived in this country. And again, there was huge generosity. I saw some of those refugees. I went to see some of the families and spend a bit of time with them. Incredibly traumatised, all really worried about relatives, in that case still in Afghanistan, who hadn't got out. Will be the same with Ukraine, because almost everybody arriving will have relatives still in Ukraine. So there's a huge amount of support that needs to go in relation to those who are arriving. Then there's the schooling issues and the work issues, etc. So I think the generosity of people offering their homes is incredible. I do want to see the government put a serious package around it to make it work.
So you don't think you'll be able to, for concerns of security, presumably, as leader of the...
I think it may be difficult, but, equally we want to play our part. Our children are, quite young, but they're very struck by all of this. And, we talk about it as a family quite a lot.
Let's go to other calls. Tim in Hull. Tim, you're through to Sir Keir. Thank you for hanging on the line, sir. Your question.
Hi, Tim.
Good morning, gentlemen. Hi, Sir Keir. Hi, Nick.
Hello, sir.
Good morning, gentlemen. I've got a question for Sir Keir.
Yeah.
As a former Merchant Navy seafaring officer who served aboard the Pride of Hull, and in fear of coming across as an LBC reporter, I have to say to you that I'm actually in the car park of the Pride of Hull port at the moment, and I'm about 150 metres away from my ship, and in the memory of all of those seafarers, can I just say that in 1982 left this very same port on the on the Norland, which was a P&O Vesey, and had to make haste, according to the letter discharged by the Admiralty when it was commandeered, and make haste way to the Falkland Islands with 2 para. Every single merchant seafarer, my former colleagues, went on that ship and served this country and went with that vessel to the Falklands with all its dangers. I'd like to ask you, Sir Keir, what are you going to do, what will Labour do in future to stop this absolute travesty of justice in the way in which this company and this man who leads the company has performed? Because at the end of the day, this question is in the memory of all those very good brave seafarers.
800 P&O workers. Peter Hepplethwaite is the CEO of whom you speak. Of course, this is the so-called hire and refire. Stay on the line, Tim. Sir Keir.
Tim, we need to change the law, and I'll come to that as briefly as I can in just a minute. But before I do, I want to pick up on the tone of your contribution, because there are 800 people who lost their jobs, but beneath those there are the human beings involved in this. And I met some of them, Tim, last week, and just as you described what happened in 1982, they've described to me just how devastated they are by this. One of the women I spoke to last week had delayed having her children because she was working for P&O, and she felt so much part of the family that is P&O. One of the men I spoke to was between cross and emotional, because he had done safety work on the boat, on the ferry, and they love the ferry. This is their life. They've got a connection with the ferry. He'd done safety work in difficult circumstances on that ferry, and he knew that he and his team had done the right thing when it was rough out at sea, and he was really worried about what was going to happen when it was being staffed by people who didn't know the boat, didn't know the ferry as well as he did. So there's a very important emotional thing here. Tim, as to what's happened, I mean, it's shocking on so many levels. Firstly, that pre-recorded video telling people this is the last day of your job, absolutely shocking. Second thing that's really shocking is to see the senior management parading into Parliament last week saying, yes, we broke the law, we knew what we were doing, we decided it was better to break the law. Absolute contempt. And then, Tim, the bit that goes to the heart of your question, which is the ability of P&O to fire 800 people and then bring in new staff on wages below the minimum wage. The sort of thing you wouldn't think was possible in 21st century
This would be
Britain.
illegal under Labour.
This would be illegal. It requires 2 changes to the law. I've looked at it in some detail. We flagged this, Tim, to the government 2 years ago.
I think your colleague Barry Gardner's worked quite hard on this, hasn't he?
Yeah, and Carl Turner in particular, who, of course, is one of the MPs in Hull. So, Tim, this was flagged for the government 2 years ago. We've been banging on about it for 2 years. Carl Turner, who's the MP or one of the MPs in Hull, has been on and on and on. He's been saying to the government, this is going to be a problem. Sooner or later, somebody is going to crash through this gate if you leave it open. The government, Tim, if you can believe it, 2 years ago acknowledged the problem. They could see that you could get round the minimum wage legislation and said, that doesn't seem to be justifiable to us. We'll review it with a view to changing the law. And then in those intervening 2 years, they've done nothing, and that allowed P&O to do what they've done. Now, the government, in fairness, is now saying, well, we'll close the gate now, and we will support that, Tim. There's no question of that. But for the 800 people, had that gate, had that loophole in the law been closed 2 years ago, they would not have lost their jobs in the way that they did in the last week or so.
Transport Secretary Grant Shapps is to write and to try and attempt P&O ferries, to block P&O ferries from all UK routes. Is that going far enough, Sir Keir?
Well, I'd like to see him go further than that because...
What more can he do?
Well, there's the holding company, DP, who are the holding company for P&O. They have, already got millions of pounds of government money, taxpayer money, and they're in for, I think it's £50 million as one of the free ports. I think it's 50 million, Nick. I'm just trying to remember whether it's the right figure, but a huge amount of taxpayer money. And I'd like to see the government take stronger action in relation to that. But, I think... the other thing I would say is, look, this memo went round the night before to the government departments. Grant Shapps said he didn't see it. I've never quite understood properly the explanation for the government being put on notice that this was going to happen, right. Not seeing the memo, then it happens, and now they're saying they should be reinstated. Well, if somebody had seen the memo and picked up the phone to P&O, we might have had a different outcome.
All right, just a quick one, Tim. Have you found other employment, sir? Just briefly, I know my listeners would want to know.
Sorry, I didn't give you the heads up. This was back in early 2000. I brought Pride of Hull back from Fincantieri myself.
I see what you wanted to say. OK, thank you for that, Tim. Good to hear. Look after yourself. We must move on to other questions. To Essex, to Thurrock and Jason, your call to Sir Keir. Go ahead, Jason.
Morning.
Hi, Jason.
OK, so Labour are calling a lot for a windfall tax on the big energy companies, which sounds good. Surely it would be better to just abolish the 25% green levy and you get the companies to use their massive profits to invest in the green tech instead of us. It'll be a quicker fix to our bills.
Let those rich companies, what is it, a licence to print money? I think the boss of BP, slip of the tongue there, Sir Keir, of BP said, Keir Starmer.
Jason, look, thanks for raising this because I think so many people are worried about how they're going to pay their bills, particularly the energy bill. They know it's going up by several £100s in just a few days now. They know it's probably going up again in the autumn, and they're very, very worried about it. Jason, what we, the Labour Party, have said is that we should have, as you rightly say, this windfall tax on the oil and gas companies in the North Sea. That's a tax on the profits that they have made that they didn't expect to make because the global market prices are so high. They've made money they didn't expect to make. I think the phrase they used, Nick, was more money than they know what to do with. And so we say, well, tax that bit, the bit that they didn't expect to get, and use that to, coupled with a VAT cut, to pay towards the energy bills of people. And that, we think, can raise up to about £600 for those most in need.
They've subsequently bleated R&D, research and development, Sir Keir, and this will help develop non-fossil fuels, etc., etc. Keir Starmer.
Look, I mean, in relation to the profit they expected to make, that's a fair argument because every company needs to make enough money to be able to plough it back in, etc. The windfall element of this is it's on money they didn't expect to make, that they didn't plan to make, that they never put aside for R&D because the global price has pushed it through the roof. So this doesn't hold them back on that. And, compared, Jason, with the government scheme, which is essentially to say to people, we'll give you a loan of up to £200 in the autumn. So the first thing is it's about 6 months after the bill lands, so not that helpful. The loan then has to be repaid in the years to come. So we've said oil and gas companies should pay for this. The government says, no, those paying the bills should pay for this because it's a loan. We're going to get your money back. But the real problem, Jason, it goes to your point about timing, is the loan idea for the government was based on their assumption that global prices would come back down again pretty quickly, and therefore you wouldn't notice you were paying off the loan next year and the year after. But that looks pretty unlikely to me. So, I mean, the government, on all these things to do with cost of living, has got to go back to the drawing board.
You're absolutely right. I've just had clarified the P&O parent company, £50 million for London Gateway and Southampton, just to...
So it was the 50 million. I thought that was the figure. I just wanted to double-check that.
Just called in my ear, so we just double-checked. Jason, thank you. Helen's in Leamington Spa. Helen, your question to Sir Keir. Go ahead. Good morning.
Good morning, Sir Keir.
Hi, Helen.
Hello, a question regarding the Ukraine refugee situation. After spending 8 hours completing 7 visa applications 10 days ago for the homes for refugees, I'm no further forward. We don't even know if the applications are being processed. No one will talk to us. How can this bureaucratic system be simplified and just get these women and children here who we're being told are perhaps Russian spies? They are literally just, well, my 7 are staying in a 1-bedroom flat with 12 people, 3-year-old twins. We just need to get them here as soon as possible. And can you help us in any way, please?
Well, Sir Keir's been very strong. Let's hear some more, Sir Keir.
Helen, look, firstly, I'd say to you, thank you for your generosity. That's incredible, along with the thousands of other people. To say that you'll take people up through the Homes for Refugees scheme is an incredible thing, of which we are all really, really proud, Helen. Your story about the delays is the latest I've heard, I'm afraid. There are lots of these stories. So if yours, Helen, was the only case of a system otherwise working well, I'd say, well, it's a glitch, let's sort it out. But the whole system isn't working. So many cases where people have filled in the forms, or they're waiting as you are waiting for no good reason because the Home Office isn't processing these cases quickly enough, or other people I've heard of who've registered and heard really nothing back in response. And this DIY way of doing it isn't good enough. Helen, what we will, it's very important when I come on this show in particular that where people raise things, I go away and action them. So, Helen, if we could make sure we get your details, I will make sure that I hook you up with whoever your MP is and make sure that we put some pressure on here in your individual case. Obviously, the scheme as a whole needs to run better. But, Helen, I will take away your individual case and try to see whether we can't help resolve that. I think it might be your colleague
Matt Weston, actually, if it's Lemon Sparrows. It could well be Matt.
It could be Matt Weston.
Okay,
it'll depend exactly where you are, Helen. But we'll get you the best answer we can, Helen.
OK, stay on the line. Talk to one of my colleagues. We'll put the, the 2 departments or 2 teams together. Helen, thank you. And again, credit to you. Well done. Ashley and Dulwich, your question. Good morning, Ashley.
Hello.
Hi, Ashley.
Mine's about Jamaica and what I would consider a failed attempt by the royal family to go and look at it. And I want to ask you, do you think not apologising was the right thing for the royal family to do? And also, what would you have advised if you were in power, I had the opportunity to talk to William and Kate, what would you have advised them to do? Because to me, it was a terrible failing.
Was it a failing, Sir Keir?
No, I don't think it was. William and Kate went on an important trip with important messages, including messages about the changing nature of the Commonwealth going forward. And that is difficult, but it's very easy to sit here and criticise. Before I was a politician, I was a lawyer, and I did a lot of work in Commonwealth countries, probably about 20 or so, including in the Caribbean and in Africa. Probably I've been to Jamaica many, many times, and Bahamas and Barbados with work. I know just how strong the connection is between those countries and ours. It's very, very deep. But of course, that relationship changes. I want it to endure. I want it to continue. And I think it will. But, in the end, William and Kate are right that time changes things, and we need to make sure that relationship is fit for the future as well as the past. Now, I don't undermine the Commonwealth here. I love the Commonwealth, and that's why I spend a lot of my time working in the Commonwealth. I think it's very important going forward, but it needs to modernise as we go forward so we can strengthen those bonds. And I know from the people I know in Jamaica just how important that bond is.
If you want to modernise, Sir Keir, how wise or otherwise is it to have a young royal couple being driven in a 1953 Land Rover? It seems reminiscent of the Empire.
Having just said I don't want to criticise, I have to say that I've found that a bit odd, because in a sense what William and Kate were doing, which I applaud, is saying we're looking to the future, but then a sort of but that all harked of the past, so I didn't quite see how that actually fit that well with the aim of their trip. But what they're trying to do, I think, is right, which is to say, look, the Commonwealth is a special thing. How do we hold it together? Now, all those countries have quite rightly had their independence for decades. It's for those countries to decide who they want as head of state, etc. But I think William and Kate right to say, let's have the discussion about what this looks like going forward.
And to Ashley's point, should he have gone further as regards Britain's history with slavery?
he could have gone further, but again, it's a difficult one. And I think that he may go further in the future.
Would you advise him so to do? He seems to be a young man who wants to, quite understandably, cut his own groove.
I think he does, and he's obviously made comments this morning, I think, about
to
the
drop
whole...
don't explain,
don't complain.
Would you support that, Sir Keir?
I think I want to know a bit more about how far that goes, because that's a big break with the convention. On the other hand, it is for, each monarch at the appropriate time to decide how they want to lead. So I'd like to know a bit more about it, because it is a big change. But there's always change, and whenever there's change, we always think, whoa, I'm not sure. And then actually that change becomes the normal, and we learn to live with it. So I actually think that what William and Kate are doing by trying to look forward is the right thing. It'll be bumpy along the way, but I do think it's the right thing.
Thanks, Ashley. Tony in Coventry, your turn. Morning, Tony.
Hello.
Hi,
morning.
Tony.
Good morning, Keir. My question is about Ukraine, and it's whether you believe it's right that the free world should be standing by while Ukraine are pleading for help and not getting the help that they need to survive, and that and the amount of people that have been murdered by Putin and his army. Do you think, as a politician, that you should be doing more, or should we be going in there and just standing up to Putin? Because I believe we're making the same mistakes as we did before the Second World War.
So, Keir, where is the red line for you?
Tony, thank you for your call. And I can detect in what you say, and I think it's for real. We're all a bit uncomfortable with the fact that Russia is invading a European country. The tanks are there, those missiles are there, and we're taking defensive steps. So we're sending military equipment. We're putting in the strongest possible sanctions and obviously dealing with the humanitarian crisis. But we are not getting drawn directly into the conflict, and I think that does make us all feel uncomfortable. There are two things that flow from that. The first is, I think everybody does genuinely understand why NATO is reluctant to get into a direct conflict with Russia, because that's a huge escalation, has massive implications, and that's why the NATO countries are not willing to get drawn in as things stand. And I think it's very important that we stand united with NATO on this. What Putin wants is division there, and we must not allow him to have that division. The second thing, Tony, that follows is that what we are doing, the provision of that military equipment, must go further, the sanctions must go further, and obviously the humanitarian aid must go further, because the provision of military equipment, the sanctions, are having to do a lot of work in this conflict, which is why the sanctions shouldn't just be to isolate Russia, they should be to cripple the ability of Russia to function. They have to go that far, and that's why we've been pushing the government as hard as we have on them.
So where is the red line?
Well, Nick, I get pushed the whole time in studios. What about chemical weapons? What about nuclear weapons? I don't think the what-ifs in the conflict are the right way to approach this. Everything we do has to be in lockstep with NATO. Everybody understands.
So chemical weapons isn't a red line?
Well, look, chemical weapons is a serious escalation of the situation. And obviously NATO will have to decide how to respond should we get to that position, which I hope we don't get to. And obviously there are issues in relation to nuclear. I'm not saying there are no red lines, but I think the what-ifs at the moment are the wrong approach here. We need to de-escalate this and find a way through that reduces the aggression and deals with the invasion.
A couple of questions on the emails, texts and tweets, Sir Keir. Chris in Barrow, does Keir Starmer think that Boris Johnson and the Tories are too close to Russian money and oligarchs?
Yes, and they have been for a very long time.
OK. This one from Pat in Worcester Park. Like Keir, my wife works in the NHS. If anyone was to insult her, I would hit him just like Will Smith did at the Oscars. Would Sir Keir do the same? Are you aware of this? I'm sorry.
I am aware of this. In fact, my wife showed me it. So I'm aware of it.
I wonder where we go with this. With what sort of comments did your wife show you this?
She I mean, like everybody else, I was pretty shocked at it. I think, of course, there are circumstances, and anybody who insults family members excites something quite emotional in all of us. But on the other hand, to go up and hit someone in that way is wrong. I'm afraid it was the wrong thing to do, and it was. At the Oscars, you've got all the cameras there, millions of people watching. It was wrong. It was the wrong response in the circumstances. He's apologised, obviously. I get that. But I was struck by the fact that it didn't appear to me to be completely spontaneous. If something happens, somebody reacts, but he sort of walked on quite calmly and then... hit someone. I'm sorry, for me, that's the wrong side of the line.
All right. Last question is to Scotland. Iris in Aberdeen. Iris?
Hello.
Hi, Iris.
Hello. Do you think it's fair that transgender women with all the physical advantages are allowed to compete in women's sport? The recent one being Leah Thomas, the American swimmer, who's about 3 foot taller than all the other swimmers.
Well, not quite 3 foot, but Leah Thomas, is someone who is transitioning. She was very successful in some American championships. She could even be on course to actually swim for the United States in the Paris Olympics. Iris, that's to what you refer, Sir Keir.
Well, thanks for raising this, Pat. I think it's for the sporting bodies to decide for themselves how they deal with this. Throws up all sorts of difficult questions. The sporting bodies mainly, and again, Nick, correct if I'm wrong about this, but I think Sport England have been quite clear about the rules that they apply in these situations to avoid the
but could she
unfairness.
swim at the Olympics?
Well, again, that'll have to be for the International Olympic Committee. But when I looked into this, I did look at the Sport England guidelines. I think it was Sport England. I'm trying to dredge my memory. And where they'd crafted quite a careful balance. And it seemed to me that if they could do it, other sporting bodies could probably do it. It probably needs more discussion. I get that. But I would
But in your book, she is a woman.
Well...
I mean, I note in yesterday's diary page in the Mail on Sunday, you will have seen this, it is reported that you have been referred to the Equality and Human Rights Commission over your response that trans women are women.
Well, Nick...
J.K. Rowling saying Labour can, quotes, no longer be counted on to defend women's rights. Sir Keir.
Of course we can be called on to defend women's rights. We have
J.K.
done for a long, long time. And I've spent a lot of my working life dealing with violence against women and girls firsthand. And I know from that experience just how important it is to fight for women and fight for equality. We have had, of course, all adult females are women. Of course they are. We have had legislation in this country which makes it clear that, in some circumstances, particularly at the moment under the law, when you've gone through a process, you can be recognised in the gender of your choosing. That's been the position for over a decade now. I actually think the law needs reform, and I think we should discuss that. But I want to be really clear about this. I'm an advocate of safe spaces for women. And that comes through my discussions with many, many women on this, and also from my own experience of those violence against women and girls cases. So
safe spaces for women, i.e. changing... Sorry, just to clarify, i.e. changing rooms is what we're talking about.
I'm actually more concerned about... I mean, the example, the Equalities Act applies here and says there are some circumstances where you can have exemptions from for safe spaces for women. The example they give is some refuges, etc., for women who've been subjected to violence, etc.
I see.
And that's the example that is used in, I think, the footnotes of the Equalities Act. And because that's where I spent a lot of my time working, or that was a feature of the work that I was doing, it's one of the issues that I'm familiar with.
So a woman can have a penis?
Nick, I'm not... I don't think we can conduct this debate with,
Sorry, have I offended you in some way?
No, it's just... I just...
A woman can have a penis?
I don't think that discussing this issue in this way helps anyone in the long run. What I want to see is a reform of the law as it is, but I also am an advocate of safe spaces for women, and I want to have a discussion that is anybody who genuinely wants to find a way through this I want to discuss that with. I do find that too many people, in my view, retreat or hold a position of which is intolerant of others, and that's not picking on any individual at all. But I don't like intolerance. I like open discussion.
Grateful for your time as ever. Thank you, Sir Keir Starmer, appearing here with Cool Keir on LBC.
Sir Keir Starmer has told LBC Joe Biden's comments about Vladimir Putin were not helpful. The US president finished a speech on Saturday by saying the Russian president cannot remain in power. The White House later denied he was calling for regime change in Moscow over the invasion of Ukraine. Cabinet Minister Nazim Zahawi has told LBC the Chancellor is keeping support through the cost of living crisis under review. Rishi Sunak has been accused of not doing enough.